So welcome everyone. It's morning in some places, afternoon and evening in other places. My name is Sirisha Naidu. I'm Associate Professor of Economics at University of Missouri, Kansas City. And I welcome you to this forum, which is being brought by the Department of Economics, also co-sponsored by the Economics Club. I speak from the unceded homelands of the Kickapoo, Osage, Missouri, Kansas, and the Sioux, what is now known as Kansas City, in the state of Missouri in the US. And I offer this land acknowledgement not as a signifier or an empty signifier, but really in recognition, solidarity, and commitment to the ongoing struggles of Indigenous First Nations people in the Americas, but also the struggles of Indigenous people across the world, including the Adivasis in India. Acknowledgement is also in solidarity with the struggles across the world for a decent life, often even the right to live and live with dignity. So this commitment to a more just world, deeply reflects the academic and non-academic work that many of us are engaged in. So we're here to discuss Mobile Girls Kootam. It's a book that's recently been released, and it's about the lives of rural migrant women in India. Now, it's been presented in the form of conversations where the women discuss their lives as working class women. They discuss factory, gendered norms, access to public spaces, etc. The book is published by Zubaan in India, and it's been distributed by the University of Chicago Press elsewhere. But what we're here to discuss is more than just a book. Mobile Girls Kootam has sort of taken on various forms. It's been released in terms of a series of podcasts. The book is, or portions of the book are being translated into Hindi. The book is also being converted into a play. And so there are all these different possibilities that the book itself has presented to everyone involved, but also to us as audience, the readers, people who are interested. So what we're going to do today is sort of in three parts. I'm going to start off with inviting co-creators of Mobile Girls Kootam, Madhumita Dutta, Sam, PC, and Madhushree. So we're gonna have a conversation, and thereafter I'm going to invite Koni, Benson, and Sundari, Anitha to offer some comments, and then I'm going to open up to everyone, so all of us present here can be in conversation with each other. So let me start with an introduction of the co-creators, and then I will introduce the discussants, when it's time for them to speak, so that people don't forget who is actually speaking. So we have Madhumita Dutta. She's an assistant professor in the geography department at the Ohio State University. Prior to this, she was a postdoctoral fellow in the School of Labor Studies and Employment at Pennsylvania State University. She completed her PhD in labor geography at University of Durham, UK. But prior to her academic career, Madhumita has been an activist for over 16 years in India, working with communities resisting takeover of their natural resources and sources of livelihoods, as well as the destruction of their social and cultural habitats by the state and corporations alike. Sam PC is a multidisciplinary storyteller with 12 years of experience in creating innovative spaces to cultivate meaningful stories. Over the years, she has created 18 theater productions, textbooks on theater, documentaries, zines, 65 TV episodes, podcasts, the first street art festival in Chennai, and more. She's a 3-time resident of the Assemblage Asian Artists Theatre Minduel Village in the Republic of Korea, and she's currently heading the content department of Why Not Studios, a film production company, and she runs a year-long program called No Blank Pages, where writers investigate their writing processes and build personalized toolboxes for creativity. And we also have with us Madhushree. She's a comics maker and illustrator based in Chennai. She's also a performer, some very interesting work. And she's interested in bringing visual and performance art together in her work. So welcome everyone. I am going to very quickly spotlight our initial speakers, if I can find them.
I think you can spotlight one of us at a time. Oh, you can spotlight. Okay.
So let me start with asking a question to Madhu. So Madhu, can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to engage in conversations with rural working women migrating to the big city in Tamil Nadu? For people who are unfamiliar, it's a state in southern India. And why these particular women? The book really is in conversation with 5 women, Kalpana, Abhinaya, Lakshmi, Pooja, and Satya. So why these particular women? And are you sort of still in touch with them? And are they involved in aspects of this project?
Hey, thanks, Sirisha. This is great. Thanks for organizing, first of all. And I'm not sure if Ishani Butalia is here. If she's here, I wanted to give a shout out for her. Ishani Butalia is with Zubaan, which published this book, and she has been really one person who kind of motivated all to sort of complete the book and publish it, and huge support. So if she's there, and Purnima from Zubaan, I just wanted to sort of say thank you to all of them, and thanks for joining, and for rest of you. So to your question, so just to sort of give a little background, and if people have seen the book, it kind of talks about it. So it is part of the work that I was already engaged in a very non-academic space as an activist, which you mentioned, working on land and labor rights issues, and also being part of a collective in Chennai called Vetiver Collective, which is a space for activists and other young people to come together and talk, debate, act on issues that are of concern, environment, labor, etc. So it's a pretty sort of open space. So in 2005 and 6, when the Special Economic Zone Act, which some people might be familiar with, was being passed in India, there was a huge sort of national debate and uproar. There was a lot of organizing on the ground, and some of us were involved as part of that, including Tamil Nadu Labor Blog. So there were a bunch of us and the Unorganized Workers Union. So we were doing multiple level of labor, land related organizing and work. And during that time, it was also obvious that there were some things that were happening in Tamil Nadu which were different than the land struggles and the labor struggles in other states like Maharashtra and other places. So that was one of the things that I noticed, and other scholars were talking about, and activists were talking about, in terms of response of the people who were sort of migrating in and coming to work in the special economic zones and the factories that were being set up. So that was really one of the key motivation, and about which I wanted to research, and which was sort of in a way somehow in our activism, in our other sort of work, we are not able to fully sort of appreciate like people's motivation, what makes them do what they do. So that was partially, and or not partially, it was the driving sort of factor, and also given the kind of caste, gender, land dynamics of Tamil Nadu, the historical context of unionizing in Tamil Nadu. So there were multiple things that were happening. So So based on that, so I was doing this research, and in the process, I met several interlocutors like Kalpana and others who were part of this. And Kalpana is really the person who sort of brought me into this space, which we call Muttu's room, and introduced me to these women. And of course, we went to different rooms and different, so there was a lot of work that happened inside the factory and outside of the factory. So these women were in a way kind of living together and working together, and this was a space that was very welcoming. So, as happens in most research processes, things snowball and you find a group to work with. So and so in that sense, we sort of came to this space amongst many other spaces. And yes, I have been in touch with some of them, not everybody, because there was a factory closure and people moved on. But some of us kept in touch over since 2013 till now and continue to. So it's a friendship, it's a journey that we are in, where we join in at different points of time. But yes, to respond to your question, yes, I have been in touch with many of them, but also not been in touch with, because not just these 5 women, but there are others too. So it's a huge group of people, if that responds to your question.
Absolutely, thank you. And you get so much of the lives of women and all of those conversations through the book. So it's so like I want everyone to go read the book. Sam, a question directed to you. You joined Madhu in her field work, and you were responsible for the production of 10 episodes of podcasts from the conversations with the women, and it appeared on Radio Potti. And so what were you keen on highlighting through the podcast? And who were you hoping to reach and why, right? I mean, because as Madhu said, this is sort of, not just about, it's not just about the book, it's about the lives of the women. And so, what were you hoping in terms of the podcast? What was your process?
Okay. I think I just want to give a little bit of context as to how the podcast happened and then why I focused on certain things. One, I think Karen is part of this meeting, but I was translating something for Karen, and Karen is Madhu's friend. And I've heard of Madhu, I've seen Madhu and all of that in Whittier Collective. And then she was like, Madhu's been looking for a translator for a long time. Please go work with her. So that is how I landed up working as a translator. And something about, she went on saying these words, participatory action research, participatory action research. And for me, I translated it to the most simplest language. Participate, do, research. Like that's all. So someone has to do something to research and ask a question, get answer. So it was the idea of doing it as a group. Luckily for Madhu at that point of time, we had started a kind of an independent podcast production group. And I was like, we are interviewing, I am transcribing, we are using all of that in your PhD, this thing. Then we used to have these long conversations when we went on the bus back from the Kanchipuram house all the way to this. And then it's like, okay, then why not do podcast? Luckily, Madhu got excited. Okay, like, okay, then we'll do podcast. And then we started talking about it. And that's where it came from. Now, the other lucky thing is they were, I think 25, no, Madhu. They were 25, I was 25 at that same, 24, 23, 25. And we were all kind of, even though we were from different backgrounds, as girls, we were kind of concerned about the same thing. There's love, there is family, there is body, there is work. That in between space between being a child and having to adult for the sake of adulting, all of that was going on, right? And that was the possibility for me to connect. Of course, there were many times where Madhu had to tap my shoulder and say, ask this question, but there was that rapport that was already there. So from my side of time, I just thought these are conversations I just don't want to have for somebody's notebooks and notes on some PhD research. I want to share this with my friends because this is like, for me, I saw gold in it, Madhu saw gold in it, and there is a certain kind of a space that we were entering into that, mostly you don't hear women happily talking about these things. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say. I am working, I am hard, going through troubles, I have period. That kind of, when men write about women and their troubles, they'll write in this kind of fun. You understand what I'm trying to say, just about. But when we were speaking, there was such humor to it, because this is our lives and this is what we're going through and all of that, right? And we live through this with its troubles and with the light side that we see. And that was what I was focusing on. And in terms of editing and putting these things together, that was what I was always, seeing whereas the person said the thing that has, piqued that humor in that role. Yeah. So.
But that, such an incredible skill, right? To take hours of conversation and to like kind of work on it, the editing, right? Which I'm much more familiar with the writing part of it, right? So but talking about spaces, I want to come to Madhushree, illustrated the book. And, Madhushree, just so fascinating, right? You got involved in the project during the book stage. You were not involved in the actual field research. So, and when I was reading the book, it really helped me, right? Like, when first women are first introduced, they have a floor plan, and then you immediately, like there's a visual component to it, right? So what was your process of learning about the Mobile Girls Kootam, and what do you think illustrations, especially in a book like this, do? So what did you want the reader to take away from the illustrations?
Thanks, Sirisha. I think you have already answered the question, So basically, my purpose was to create an image. Am I audible?
You are Madhushree.
So my main purpose was to create an image that would be in sync with the text and would help in creating a world which was created by Madhumita, Sam, and these girls. And it was so fascinating. Like, I initially didn't, of course, read it in the book form. I read Madhumita's thesis. And there were so many interesting bits which haven't been incorporated in the book, but which did hook me into the project. Like I'm sure Madhumita remembers. So there was something about her waiting for the girls. So whoever of us have worked a little bit with working women, we know that a lot of time there will be this thing about them not coming in, not being able to come in time, or like time works a bit differently from people who are like, who have a deadline to finish and things to do in a different way. So so she had a bit in her thesis where she's saying how she's waiting for Muthu, which is I think Lakshmi, and Kalpana, and they are not coming, and she's waiting, and there is a heat, a Chennai heat, and all that. So these kinds of images and stories which told me so much about this a very interesting relationship between these few women coming from very different places. So that's what I think hooked me to the project, and what I wanted to do is create an image that would help the readers to get a sense of where they were. Of course, it's very generous of Madhumita to call me into this project, because this is my first book of illustration. So I have done like ad hoc comics and images before, but this was the first time she was dragging me into a whole book, and that was really, really very interesting for me. Also, it was a collective project, and almost an all-women project. That's also something that I was very enthusiastic about. So these were the things. I think I'm talking more about my purpose, but that's because more about why I got into this project than what you asked. But yeah, I mean, like I said, you already kind of answered the question. And also, what was very interesting for me was in the process of creating this world, it was almost like making our own world, because I didn't know how actually they looked. And the downside of that is, as Sam mentioned, that, like many of them don't look like how they actually look. But at that moment, for me, it gave me some degrees of freedom to work on it and create this kind of a world of our own. And that was very interesting for me. Also, I must say that in this collective project, thanks to Madhumita and Sam, I got into this even more. I came to know some of the girls, and that was actually very, very fulfilling. And I think I got to work on the fun part more. I didn't have to do the painful part where one goes and finds the women and talks to them and gets close to them, keeps in touch with them. But I got to do the fun part, which is drawing them. Yeah, so I think that's more or less.
Thanks, Madhushree. Yes, no, you did answer the question, right? Like I would also wanted to know about your process, right? But yes, talking about the fun part versus the not so fun part, right? Like the field research can be both exhilarating and frustrating at times. And Madhu talks about it a little bit, in the sort of preface. So Madhu, I want to come back to you. The book is significant for so many reasons, right? It tells the stories of women in their own voices. It challenges pedagogies and research methodologies. And you start the book with, I quote, "I invite you to listen." And that is a very, end quote, and that is a very powerful invitation, both for academics working on labor issues, women's issues, but it's also a very powerful invitation for activists to listen, right? So the question that I have for you is that, this challenge that you posed, or, you're challenging these methodologies, but what challenges does such a book pose in the academic space? Do you get any questions about, theory, right? Like that there, that where's the theory? Listening means that you're not kind of, you're the voice of the author, right? Like that you're inviting us to listen, and the book is about conversations with the women. So if you could speak to that, right? So what have you had to face in terms of questions about theory, questions about, sort of within the academic space?
Well, there is Anitha and Koni here who can also answer that question. They all do this work, and I'm sure there are others. And I'm sure they will be able to contribute to that bit of discussion. And actually, much of, the fact that I am able to do this kind of work in academic space is also thanks to people like Anitha and Koni and many others who have done this. So they have created that possibilities for many of us to enter that kind of space. But just to kind of talk about my motivation to do things within academia, which, as you say, is pushing some of these boundaries, is also to sort of the commitment to sort of really understand the political thought and activism of working class people, working class women, and how does one do that? Because often in academia it becomes, because the language, the presentation, the way we frame things, structure things, is so kind of disembodied, so sort of disconnected in so many ways. And also the politics, it much is written about politics of where these things get published, how and who reads it, etc. So for and as I was explaining right at the beginning, the motivation to do the research was to understand, like, why are people coming into these spaces, and not just to understand, like, beyond just the wages part, like why are people coming, because there is wage, the material part nobody is denying, but there is more to material part in the lives of working class people. So what is that social world, what is that social history, what is the story that brings people here? And to do that, one has to sort of really pay attention to the vocabularies, to the practices, to the sort of everyday sort of actions, and also to kind of, instead of sort of taking some of these things that people are saying, the everyday sort of nature of everyday vocabularies, and kind of glossing it with this sort of academic sort of language that we understand in this academic world. Instead of doing that, how is it to present it as it's spoken, and saying this is the theory? Because because there can be so many different ways of looking at theory, and for I think many of us, what does theory do? Does it sort of lead to some actions, some change, some transformation? What does it mean? And it doesn't have to be this spectacular thing. It can be the everyday thing. And that's what, if one one dwells into these conversations, even the illustrations do that. It is letting us dwell in those spaces, the time, what Madhushree just talked about. I mean, and women are talking about all those things, time and space, and in their everyday practices, how they are sort of pushing back against heteropatriarchal relations. They talk about all those things, but in a language that they understand, in a language that is accessible to them. So I think in academic spaces, perhaps we often don't do that, and I think that is a problem. And that is what many people, not just us here, many people are challenging. And also that divide, no, this is academic and this is non-academic. So but where is all that knowledge getting produced? The whole politics of knowledge production, which I know all of you, especially Koni and Anitha, all of you have written about. So, and I think when I'm talking about inviting you to listen, is really what our first episode did. The first episode of Mobile Girl Kootam did. It was inviting people to listen to, like, why are spaces unfree, and why are homes unfree, so like all these why questions. so those were really what really motivated me to sort of do it this way. But it was this collective desire from the group, and the book took a slightly different shape. As everybody is noticing, the women are not here, right? The women are not here, and also because it is a very different audience and a different setting. It has to be contextualized, and it cannot be just you just invite a bunch of people who cannot participate in the process. So there can be different kind of context in which different people participate. So you cannot just say you participate. So what is the context, and what is the politics within which people can participate? So I guess those are the kind of things I feel I was trying to do, and drawing from the collective process that we started in 2013. Yep.
Can I come in here?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why, Madhumita, I really love this book. And it's this difficulty we have as academics who've also been involved in activism, of producing, of doing that research and then producing outputs which are so out of reach. And if you have a long-term relationship, if you're not just parachuting there and do the interviews and then disappear into your academic world, if you have a longer-term relationships, then you have that conversation. What did you do with all this work that you time you spent with me? And the answer can't be just produced academic articles and got my promotion or my permanent job. And so then it becomes, when you look at your academic outputs, it just feels inadequate, and it doesn't feel justice to the time that they gave you. If you cannot then create something that they can share, and others that they would encounter in their everyday lives, people in their communities could look at and think about, okay, this is what I can engage with this, I can understand this. And it's that part that I really find interesting. And in terms of, I suppose in our academic world, there'll always be people who'll be saying, what about your own voice as author, and your own analysis? And I suppose it's implicit in the questions you ask, in what you choose to probe. So at several points the conversation is going on, and then you're directing it back to certain ideas about, say, what if men were to menstruate. So you're drawing upon feminist themes and debates in other contexts, and then posing it to them, asking them to reflect on it. So all those choices are being made by you in terms of guiding that. But in many ways, so there's a kind of a tricky double edge to this. On one hand, it's people's conversations, stories, and stories are easy to listen to. They're accessible, so you feel like you're sitting in that room listening to a bunch of people. You can feel the solidarity. You can also feel embarrassment. So someone said something that they shouldn't quite have said, that other people are like, okay, just stop now. So shut up seems a bit rude. So the Tamil term would be more of, an everyday term, which doesn't imply like what shut up implies. It's like Hindi, chup chup ho ja, or baskar. It's not so, So that was a little bit of like, they didn't mean it like that. But it's all of those discomforts saying, okay, you're crossing the line here. Can you just stop? Don't go there. So you can see all of that going on. So on one hand, it's accessible. On the other hand, it's harder because you have to do the job of interpreting, and you have to think about what's going on. You have to go back and say read bits and say, oh, this is how it unfolded. Oh, what was going on there? So on one hand, it's accessible. On the other hand, it requires more work of us to interpret what's going on, because you're not doing that for us. And so I find that really interesting in creating an output like this. But a question for you. So are you so for the work that we did on striking women, we also created resources, and the comic was aimed at children in those communities. And so we know that they are being used in schools. And so are these are different forms, the podcasts, this book, or you're saying they've been translated plays, will they be taken back to those communities? And
I will let Sam answer that question. Sam.
Okay.
I'm going to also throw in another question I have for Sam, on the play itself, right? Because you're working actually with Kalpana, Muthu, and Buala to produce and direct the play. Madhu is also part of the project, and Madhu is contributing from the US. So, in addition to Anitha's questions, what are you hoping that the audience will take away from it, and then how involved are the mobile girls in the playmaking? And just for the audience, the person who just spoke, Professor Sundari Anitha, she is one of the discussants, and I will provide an introduction as soon as Sam answers the question, so people don't have this question.
First of all, Koni and Sundari, I've been following your works. I'm really happy that somehow the universe has conspired that we are the people discussing this. So I'm very happy. The play actually started 6 years back. I don't want it. It's not a new project at all. Okay. When I walked into the project, I thought there's going to be, usually PhD students take their own time to finish their PhDs. Okay, so I thought I'm going to spend a lot of time with the mobile girls and Madhumita, but somehow a lot of things happened in terms of Nokia, and the family shut down. So my work changed from field interpreter to activist, which is not new to me, but some kind of space like that. And at that moment, also playing with this whole PAR thing and how to work with it after the podcast. Theater is very natural to me. I come from a very theater, cinema space and stuff like that. So for me, immediately I saw play happening, right? It's the most dramatic moment. All of these guys have built up their hopes, and there was something very unique about the union that they had formed, that it wasn't a political party union, but it was a very, like Marx would have been, very, very labor-oriented union, where they had gotten together and fought for their own rights, and they had gotten a actually very considerable rise, right, Madhu, and for factory workers. And at that moment, when these girls were at the height of hope, they shut down the factory and said they were going to Hanoi. It's very cruel, but as a storyteller, dramatic moment hit in my head of my own friends. I've done it to other people also who are my friends. But I was like, you know what, guys, this is the time you need to tell a story. And we started talking about it. And at that point is when we wrote the play. And we wrote it over in Vetiver Collective in their beautiful building is where we all sat together and we workshopped and we came up with a very interesting play. And today the play that I am directing is very close to the play we wrote 6 years back. Funnily, that's 6.
We seem to have lost Sam momentarily.
Has everybody lost me? Or
for a little bit. Yes, now we can.
Okay, Vetiver Collective, you heard till then, no? Okay. So yeah. So basically, this dramatic conflict was a story I was not going to go away very silently, not telling, right? I really wanted these girls to like milk the thing out of it and say who they were as human beings because they mean so much to me. See, the other thing, like Madhushree was talking, I come from a background of where everyone expected me to get a PhD. Okay, I came from a background of everybody being academics and what Sundari was talking about, translating language back and forth and all of that. I heard these as like 5-year-old and people talking all of this. So in very much, Madhu was the best thing to happen to me because she gave me the space to be myself, right? And where research matters to me as much as art matters to me, as first and foremost people matter more than anything else. So I think Mobile Girls in that sense was a very, very close to my heart project, which kind of in many sense crystallized who I am. So it kind of became the beginning of a lot of other things I started doing. So that, that's a very dear project to me. So
we lost Sam again. Madhushree, do you want to jump in and add something about the play while we're waiting?
Yeah. Madhushree might not know. Hi, Madhushree, can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah. So the play right now is all over the place. I want to be very honest. Okay, because after many years we thought we'll want the actors to be workshopped and do the play. But Madhu is good. I'm sorry, Madhu, for saying this, but good 1 generation older than us. Okay. So we were on the cusp of our lives changing in the last 6 years. Okay, we all gave birth to babies, we all fell in love with the wrong men. All of that happened in the last 5 years. Okay, so Madhu was left in her where she's already done this and come into her PhD kind of that space. So she was seeing all these little girls growing up kind of in space, but because of that I wasn't able to direct the plays with the girls themselves. So now we have moved it on to professional actors and we are hoping to I'm trying to see a certain kind of a mode where any actor can play any role, and therefore it kind of is a circular thing that people take on the story and move on. And the main idea is to move to the villages that these girls come from, not the big cities. I mean, big cities can happen, but it's to take it forward and continue this conversation about workspaces right from the house to the outside to the body to all of it. Yeah.
Madhushree, do you want to add something?
No, I think, Sirisha, it's too early for me to chip in about the play because it hasn't started. Of course, I attended. I think part of your question was how involved are the Mobile Girls in it?
Yes.
And I think at least those who are in touch with Sam and Madhumita now, I think very much they are involved. And while the play was being discussed actually in Sam's house few days few weeks back. They were very enthusiastic about it. And you know what, another funny thing is that now the mobile girls who were 20, 23, 25 at that time are all like with children. So now they also bring in so many new emotions into the whole thing, you know, which is also, which makes it difficult. The process adds to new degrees of difficulty, but also very creatively interesting. So I'm also looking forward to what it's going to be. Yeah.
Right.
Closer to my generation, Sam, now.
Can I quickly ask, so is there a sense of discomfort or difficulty because they're challenging, yeah, through their voices, and so you're taking it back to their own communities where they may be slightly differently positioned, you know, so your positionality shifts. You know, it's been a bit of a time, so there must be conflicts and there must be tensions there.
So, yeah, I mean, so from what Sam was saying, that initially what was the script is obviously kind of now evolved, and there are different ways in which we are planning it, and Sam is sort of thinking of different ways of presenting, different forms of presenting it. And one of the things we would like to also do is, while we speak of the time when, you know, pieces when they were here and how they were, you know, living their life and challenging different things, but also to bring some of the present moment in their life, so incorporate that. So there will be also some, actually what Sam, Madhushree and all talked about is some sort of a little multi sort of media sort of thing, where there'll be some bit of videos. So I think there would be that challenge that you're saying. And also right now, while we have the locations, we don't know exactly it will be the villages or closer to. So there are a lot of things that we are negotiating. But one of the things that Sam sort of was talking about, and which we will try and do to some extent, is sort of also take from inspiration from Auguste Boal's Theatre of the Oppressed, and using Theatre Forum as a way of experimenting a bit with that that form of a theatre. It will be again very context specific and where we are doing it, to be able to have a dialogue. And, you know, because there will be, we feel, and it is not just from the families, it is also from a larger context, because here the women are talking about intercaste marriages, they're talking about sex, they're talking about, you know, why boys do this and why girls. So there is a larger societal challenge. So there has to be some ways, it's creative, it is challenging, but it will encounter these. So what are the ways? And I think we will also learn as we go along, what are the ways we sort of create possibilities of dialogue. And so we do, I mean, we do appreciate that there will be things that will happen, which we can't fully anticipate, but we are thinking about it, especially from the families.
Go ahead, Sam. Sam, you're muted. Oh, and now you froze.
I can answer this from an academic perspective, but one of the things is, see, I think both Madhu was very aware of this, and maybe that's why I joined her also, is that they do not become somebody else's. Everyone else
mute themselves if they're not?
The host can mute the other somehow. I don't know how. Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that helped me connect with Madhu earlier on, then, you know, because at that point of time, many people calling me for translating into Tamil and English, is that she was not looking at people, she was talking to as subjects, right? Subjects to understand a certain world, which is a very colonial way of doing an ethnography or geography study of something. And I think one of the other things that really interested me is that she was looking at geography as very personal boundaries, not just, you know, factory, a nation, state, this thing. She was also looking at, you know, personal boundaries. And we, both Madhu and I, were very conscious that there are many experiences that the women even today are going through that we are outsiders to. But as women, there are certain things we are insiders to. So there is a certain kind of an exchange that happens. And going back after all these years is truly purely Madhu's effort, going, chasing each one of us, making sure we are fine, making sure we are, because, like I said, we all grew up under senses, and she has chased after us with lots of love. And in bringing together this play, there's a clear understanding, even when I had the girls over, that obviously creatively they don't see eye to eye, but it's in the emotional level that we see eye to eye in terms of what story we're going to see. And I am going to make sure that I'm going to definitely say to the people they want to say it. And we were very clear when we started off with this project not to do this sob story of women went through this kind of thing, but that the women are so resilient to have gone through this thing and continued with their lives and still continue with all the experiences that life bring to them. And that's where the transmedia or multimedia bit and all comes in, but also within the story. So even the story, if you see it, it's about the one day that the factory shuts down. A 6-month process, we brought it down to one day. And morning they get this news that the factory shut down. By night, the factory shut down. Right? And it's all rumors and everything they're dealing with. And it's about how they go through this arc of, at the end of the day, my life is in my hand. Right? While they... while they dialogue with the different things that, what do you say? I am not dialogue with their life.
Sirisha, can I add
Yes,
something?
please, Madhushree.
Yeah, I think one direct answer to Anita's question is that the play, once it happens, will be taken to the villages or suburban places where the women are located. So that is one thing which is like a direct effort to take this play to where the women are. And another thing is where it's not only about the women who were involved, but also we are thinking whether it's possible to take the play to places like rural colleges, where women of that age group are still coming to, still migrating to the cities as more mobile girls, and being exploited in the same ways. But at the same time, the issues that Madhumita mentioned in her thesis and all, that how the union work is still very male driven. So how the women are seeing themselves within that, how they're seeing labor and the politics around it. So the problems are still the same. The exploitations are still the same. And I think once this play is taken to colleges or spaces where women like that are located, then that would be like a more direct way of, what Anitha was asking. So that is one thing. For the rest of it, I think it's still, as Madhumita said, it's still in the process of being chalked out. So I don't think right now more direct answer can be given to that question, is what my feeling is.
I think basically the idea, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The idea was to go to 4 places first, right? 3 places: Sri Perumbudur, Kanchipuram, and one place. But Sri Perumbudur, Kanchipuram were the primary places to start off with the show, because Sri Perumbudur is like the home of the factory. Kanchipuram is the home of the girls. So, and a lot of the girls who are Sri Perumbudur is a full estate with a lot of different factories and stuff like that. And when the factory was shutting down, if I remember right, Madhu and I met more people than before. And we met a lot of different people who are working in the factory, who are all living in Kanchipuram in different, these things. So it's actually a hub of where people come and live. I mean, women come and live to go and work in Sri Perumbudur. So that was one of the main areas that we wanted to, target in terms of talking about this. But definitely the actors are all women, but still vehicles for these voices, right? And to start this dialogue. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. I had envisioned this entire conversation in a particular way, but I love how, it has actually turned into a Kootam. One of us should have mentioned earlier, the Kootam is really sort of a gathering, a space of, conversation, right? So I love that, Anita, I love that you just jumped in. And but I also want to make sure that I introduce you. No, please, I had not even thought of it in that way, but I'm glad that you did. I also want to introduce you though to the audience. Sundari Anitha is Professor of Gender, Violence and Work at the School of Social and Political Sciences, University of Lincoln, UK. Her research interests lie in the problem of violence against women and girls and migrant women workers, labor market experiences and industrial militancy in the UK. She has published widely in both these areas. She's also been active in addressing violence against women and girls through policy and practice initiatives for more than 2 decades, and previously managed a women's aid refuge and was a caseworker at a by and for refuge for South Asian survivors of domestic violence. And our other discussant is Koni Benson, who's a historian, organizer, and educator. She's a lecturer in the Department of History at the University of Western Cape, South Africa. She works with various archives and collectives, co-producing life histories of self-organization and unfolding political struggles for liberation, land, and public services. She draws on critical approaches to people's history projects, popular education, and feminist collaborative research praxis in her work with social movement archives and with student, activist, and cultural collectives in Southern Africa. She's also author of the book Crossroads, Where I Live, Where I Like. It's a graphic history illustrated by the Trunchbull brothers and Ashley Murray, with a foreword by Robin D.G. Kelly and published by PM Press, and it was published last year. So please, let's continue with the conversation. Koni, if you want to jump in at this point and, sort of have some comments and remarks or questions for, the co-creators of Mobile Girls Kootam.
Well, thank you. I'm really honored to be here and to be invited into this conversation or this Kootam. I think I've never met anyone here in person. I've just been following the work. And so really it's an honor to meet you all together also, because I know from doing this kind of collective work, to get people on a Zoom is not easy, to get the, and I only wish that Pooja, Abhinyaya, Lakshmi, Satya and Kalpana could also be here. But really thank you. I think, Sam, when you were speaking about being lucky or, lucky or seeing the kind of treasures or gold in these moments, I think these are sparks, and you can hear it in the text and see it in the images when you capture the smallest detail that gives you huge insight into something. It's something that a whole paragraph doesn't do justice to, like when you have a moment of some of the worker ID photos with numbers and not names. And I think it contrasts so well to what Madhumita says about how workers and women workers are usually represented or portrayed. And then we just get into this boring, stuck kind of crossroads rabbit hole of representation, as if that's all we're trying to do is get the representation right, when there's so much more at stake and there's so many other ways to communicate and to create together. So when I first saw this book, I was so excited. I emailed with Madhu and I said, I'm going to assign it for a course I'm teaching on activist archives and oral histories, because there I'm trying to get students to come up with collective and creative responses to activist archives. And I want to give them as many examples as possible. In some courses, you want to give the whole gamut of debates along the whole spectrum, and you assign things you hate. But the point is, to kind of read the whole range. And in that one postgraduate course, my goal is to only assign the most inspiring, interesting things and see what it sparks. And it's so fun. So, I mean, I think this book and a range of new books that are coming out that are nonfiction, but they are creative and they refuse the kind of activist academia divide. As if you have an academic job, you're not an activist. And as if you are an activist, you are not a researcher or a scholar or an intellectual, and you don't do the thinking or analysis work. So I think that this book really both tells us the story, but also how the story is produced. And it doesn't just get stuck at saying, you know, here's my position, I'm coming from the US, but I'm an insider and an outsider. I think that there's always ways that stories are heard or not heard. And, you know, this thing of like voice to the voiceless, everybody has a voice, but what are the power dynamics about who's heard, when, where, and why? And I think the book gives us a sense of a division of labor that's very honest and very intimate, because it is the hands of many, the work of many hands. There's a saying that comes from Morocco but on the continent, which says that an event without its poem is an event that never happened. And to capture those poems in a way that, like this book, is really, it's a treasure. I think there's so many parallels as well in terms of understanding the history of labor, migration, extractive labor, political organizing, intimate spaces, the South African context in terms of land dispossession, migrant labor is very similar in many ways, but also very different. So it's a gift for us to be able to almost be in that room, and even to visualize the room, and then to hear the kind of banter amongst people who trust each other, but who are also working on something that is urgent and serious. And I think that really stands out for me in getting a sense of how people see, but also are being seen. There's so many angles that come in part because also the podcast idea, I worked with social movements and labor unions for about 8 years before getting an academic job. And in most of that work, it was popular political education. So using Paulo Freire and mobilizing with the idea that people know what they need, they know best, but oftentimes, you know, people are not confident to speak. And then you have words like capitalism and neoliberalism and feminism, and to get together and talk about the actual issues together and create safe spaces to do that, and then to politicize the most personal issues, sometimes then results in also these really boring political pamphlets, right? That's like, this is the new line. And so to be able to illustrate the like very personal details where there's personalities, there's preferences, and then there's also positionalities and choices to be made, really is something that will resonate with many people here, I think, in South Africa, who are doing organizing work and are looking for stories that we can't have access to. We won't all be able to come to Tamil Nad, we won't all come to Chennai. And so for me, I used to avoid writing, especially academic writing, until I realized that the only way that I'm in conversation with and have learned from so many people across time is because they did the work of, like, you know, getting the text on the page, and then you can be in conversation from far away. So I'm very curious where the book will land in different contexts, you know, across South Asia, across the US, but also within spaces. I'm busy working on something that was never meant to be a book. It was collecting testimony in the midst of a land occupation as part of a fight against an eviction, and a fight against what's now called the Anti-Land Invasion Unit. And I was working in support of the person who became the leader on this field. And we track 254 days on this open field. And It is horrific. It is also inspiring, and it's this huge learning curve for everyone on the field, but also a learning curve and a relationship building between myself and Faiza Mayer, who became the leader of this occupation. And we were keeping a detailed track of everything for these court cases, and she would kind of write a few things in a diary and then come and deposit it on in my tray at work, so I would type it up, because otherwise everything would be destroyed by the police and by the army, who would come and, you know, demolish everything and raid over and over again. And then we started text messaging. So, and I would continue to plug all of that, plus the court case documents and all the press that was saying land invaders are jumping the housing queue and all of this. And then we would get together often, and she'd have blank pages in a diary, or just like 1 or 2 words, and then she would talk. And then as we talked, I typed. And so it became this transcript of 254 days on the field. And it's taken us over a decade to actually, you know, get it out there as a book, because it's never the priority to sit and do the kind of finalized editing. But as I was trying to write, and all that's left is to write the last section of the introduction, which explains our methodology. And when I was trying to do it, when I first read this book, and to me, the book really, in a way, opened up so much, because it refused to say, this is a methodology only of geography, or a methodology of podcasts. And even now, hearing you all talk about the play, I think there's so many other options of how we write. So this what's now become a book is called Writing Out Loud. And it's about, what does writing out loud mean? And I think the conversations that you've captured are so important in terms of documenting this struggle, but also will speak to many people. And so there's a lot more I could say, but I guess one of the things I wanted to end on was, you know, who do these kinds of stories need to be accountable to? Because there's obviously the people who were involved. It was their lives. They lived, you know, they lived in this room. They were sharing their stories with you. They were mobilizing in the factory. But, you know, beyond that, the Crossroads book that I worked on, and I still work in Crossroads every week here, started doing that work in 2005. Many people there, they've passed on. But it's like, what the legacy of those struggles, whose is it? And what's at risk if these things become like beautiful books that are only accessible in English, and then become kind of institutionalized? Because on the one hand, we're lucky, it seems to be almost like a growing trend. There's all sorts of graphic novels that are coming out about the most serious issues. There's Rebecca Hall's book called Wake on women-led slave revolts, for example, that Madhu and I have been speaking about. And I worry sometimes, or I wonder how you deal with these kind of alternative radical products not then becoming institutionalized or objectified, or like, you know, window dressing, where we can like throw in some creative practice, but we forget the kind of, or we have to continually remake the connections, which I think that's what solidarity demands of us. It's an enactment. And so I'm curious how you all have been navigating the kind of maintaining of the radical and risky nature of the kinds of confrontations that you took on and share with us in the book.
Madhu or Sam or Madhushree, anyone want to respond? And then I'm, you know, once you respond, then I'm also going to ask Anitha if she has any more comments. And if not, then, you know, I want to open it up to the audience. So folks in the audience, if you have any questions or you'd like to be called on, please do post in the chat or raise your hand. Yeah, to the co-creators of Mobile Girls Kootam. Sam, go ahead.
More on what Koni asked. I think Koni, Madhu is good at answering it academically, but Koni, I'd love to work with you. But other than, you know, in terms of what you're trying to create with the for me, I think in terms of, see, as much as academics comes from the West, I think study comes from all of humanity. This is my, personal, the idea of a university or whatever, an idea of publishing this in a particular kind of a format might come from the West. The idea of studying ourselves, I think, comes from, all of humanity. And because we're all curious about each other. And I think that is, as much as it was so difficult for Mother to put all of this emotion and everything into her 500 PhD thesis, I think, in terms of how we still approach those women day on and day off was at a very emotional, at a space level of, how we saw them as very much us, me as same as me in that sense. There is a certain kind of an insider into women understand women. I think in 6 of the spotlight, we're all women. And I think in as many as, different academic or whatever, worlds we live in, somehow this body unifies us. I don't know if you understand me, but I think at that was there is a certain point which Madhu did not, now later on we spoke about it. But for me, it was a very important thing to publish in that podcast was when we were all talking about, I'm sorry, Madhu, I'm again saying it to the entire world, but, when we all were talking about period, there was this moment when Madhu said, oh my God, I got my period. Okay. And she rushed to the bathroom. For me, that was the most human moment of all the 3 months that we had spent, together. Like there is a very strange reason. I don't know why uteruses sink. I don't want to go into the science or spirituality of it, whatever nonsense. Okay, but there was a certain kind of an emotion connection that happened in that room. And I'm not kidding. One day after later, I got my period, right? It was all these women going through, like, talking about period. We all got our period within that 1 week. But it's that kind of things that connect us beyond, and still being able to see the kind of things that we don't have the access to, the kind of things that are, pulling us. For me and Madhu, I think was a great revelation of how much privilege that we have in terms of, going into there. Like, as much as I grew up having enough exposure as a child, for me, that was probably for me to think, okay, that first time I probably used the word privilege for myself in that sense. Okay. And within that room itself, you can see different kinds of privilege in terms of how they've used the last 3 years of being in Nokia. Someone has got a degree, someone else has not got a degree. There were so many other, different things. Madhu, you want to take on from here? This is usually how Madhu and I work also. So Madhu, just take on.
So just very briefly, I mean, Koni, totally. I mean, I think this is a thing that we are constantly sort of struggling with, not to sort of, where is that balance? Something that comes from this sort of a radical politics gets institutionalized, and what do you do? And your question about, so where does this land? The book or the entire sort of work that, or journey that we sort of started, I think there has to be sort of like multiple ways of doing it. For instance, having this conversation. So right now, as you mentioned, so this is a book which is in English. And in fact, when the women came to Sam's house talking about the play, etc., they all have a copy of the book, but they said, well, it's all in English. What are we going to do with this? Yeah, the photographs are, these illustrations are nice, and they made fun and all that stuff. But so, and it is, as you said, it is about them, about their lives, but it is also about a larger sort of, issue of working classes and the struggles. So for instance, we are having some conversations with people in Chennai, like Gita and others, like how do we take this in a Tamil Nadu setting? Because it comes from there. It's not about, because it was originally all in Tamil, then kind of in English, and then again going back into, does it make sense to translate it back in a Tamil book? does it make sense, or is the play form a better way of doing it? Or and then what we are really talking about now is taking it back to the unions, taking it back to the men. And because in the union, we were talking all the time about it, because why, like when the factory had over 60% women, why are men I mean, there were all sort of conversations that were happening. So the idea is that sort of taking it back to other people, and unions, and also kind of doing a conversation where other women workers join in, men workers join in, and also the mobile girls join in and have a conversation. So there are those plans that are happening, and it is kind of also thinking beyond the book. The book is one thing, so that is one way we are thinking. And there is a possibility of what Shirisha was mentioning, that once you once you put something out in the world, you just don't know how it's going to circulate. So for instance, Barthe Kadam in Delhi, people with whom Madhushree works, they found some parts of the book so important for the domestic workers with whom they work. They took it and they translated, and that's moving. A group of journalists in Chitrakoot in central India, they found parts of the book very interesting, where they are actually documenting this whole thing about leisure and anti-work, and how women practice it without calling it a feminist this and that, but how women practice leisure and why leisure is important, talking about anti-work. And they took part of something that Kalpana had said, and Kalpana's thing about her talking about her skin tone, of her blackness and the sun, and work, and how she takes the breaks. I mean, so it's like how people are connecting in different ways, which is even beyond our imagination. So how this sort of circulates in the world is one hope, that it doesn't get institutionalized, and we have to be constantly alert to that. I mean, there is an academic work this should also do, in the sense to push against certain academic boundaries and putting it at the center of it, but also beyond that institutional space. So I think the constant alertness to that, and thinking about how do you move beyond, it's kind of, because it has to move beyond something, it has to sort of make change. So I think that's what I would sort of respond to you.
Thank you, Madhu. Yes,
Can I come in here?
Yes, I was just going to invite you, Anitha. Please come in.
Yeah. So also picking up on something that Koni was talking about in terms of how it lands. There's also, so when you're doing work that's research, but also has an activist dimension, and it's about people's struggles, there's also a sense of which story do you tell. So it's not just about a neutral thing that lands and is picked up, and you don't know which way it will go, who will pick it up for what reasons. There's also a sense of which story do you want to tell to different audiences, and sometimes also difficult decisions about what are the silences that you might maintain in different contexts, because you are anticipating how it might land, and there is a responsibility to the broader political project, to the women who have spoken to you, where you're thinking of how do you negotiate that for different reasons. And so it's not it's not such a neutral project of taking their voices. So that often requires a lot of thinking. So for trade unions, for our work, for trade union leaders, there's a certain message that we wanted to foreground. But for young children, we wanted a different message in a context where there's a whole dominant attitude to strikes, which is very negative. And so we had to simplify and iron out some of the difficulties and the nature of struggle, because we were operating in a broader context where there's particular constructions of industrial disputes, militancy of these of South Asian women in the UK. So it's also, you're working against the context, you're also working with a sense of purpose, and which story do I tell where, what's the most urgent thing to do here with this audience. I don't know what the two of you, Koni and Madhumita and Sam and others, think about that.
Sam, you wanted to speak, right?
See, in terms of the book is the coming together of, I think, a later on perspective, having listened to those podcasts many times and having, Madhu being part of it, doing her own research, asking many questions beyond those podcasts, which kind of brought that book together in a certain kind of a perspective. And that's why I think both the forward and the, what is it called, the epilogue, which is, talking about the act of listening and opening up ourselves comes from. As far as the podcast goes, there were two things that, that we were talking about, which the geography of spaces and bodies, right? And we were looking at, the different experiences of it. And for me, in terms of forming the narrative, luckily at that time, again, I'm sorry for overusing luckily, but I was also going through younger academics in my life who were just then, questioning the colonialism of ethnography and, academic writing and all of that. So they were also on my neck while I was working on this project with Madhu. And we were looking at, what kind of perspective to take in terms of the editing of the 2-hour-long conversation into the 30-minute, 40-minute, intimate view into the thing. And if you see, the way I enter those conversations is very much only where I see them, like at a very gut level. Right, it's not where I'm asking them questions as such, but it's more like where I'm able to see uterus to uterus, or love to love, or stuff like that, where I enter the conversation, but it's mostly them and how they see how this life goes, and I'm just there guiding them along so that they can open up. And a lot of people, see, at the point when we released that podcast was new. Podcast as a concept itself was new. Second, academic research coming into the space was new. But somehow this is really just intuition that somehow, somewhere, some woman somewhere would love to listen to this, right? Not just us. Because Madhu and I were enjoying our days in Kanchipuram, right, in many ways or the other. And we were really hoping to open up this to some other people in that sense. And to my surprise, over the 1 month or 2 months in which we, I think every weekend we published an episode. I'm not very clear about my memory, but every weekend we published an episode. A lot of people got back with the same comment that I never thought I'd ever be let into such an intimate space. Right? And it was a different kind of a listening experience for me. A lot of people who listened to the podcast and got back to me in terms of, who were listening all the other things. And I think in many way, I was not a researcher. Madhu was a researcher, I was not the researcher. And in many ways, that kind of, she was able to, in retrospect, it is Madhu who could look at it. In very, I looked at the podcast at a very heart level. What needs to be listened to? That's all I looked at, right? And all these words you guys are using, very familiar to me, but I didn't look at it in that vocabulary, is all I'm saying.
We lost Sam again. We have about 6 minutes before this event formally concludes. We have a question from Kanupriya. So I'm going to ask that question. And I think it continues this conversation on the podcast and the book. And Kanupriya's question is, how did the women feel about sharing these conversations from private space to the public, especially in their hometown? And in the form of a play, theater, etc. So, if someone can answer, Madhu, Sam, Madhushree.
Madhu?
Sam, you go ahead.
How the women are coming from, okay, so the most recent meeting, they all came home and then we were talking about it. And first of all, it was really funny to meet them after all these years, and they're all become. We were thinking of renaming the group as Mobile Mothers Kootam. This was one of the. I have a child, they have a child, and we're all. So it was very funny. But other than that, see, theatre for them, 2-3 people who are kind of familiar with theatre are familiar with theatre as a very street theatre propaganda message oriented. So for me, a lot of that day went in trying to telling them that this is storytelling, this is creativity, a lot of different things of what theatre could be. But they're all extremely excited about bringing this to where their families are. That much I can see, right? This is where they want to bring it to where they know the women, where they want to talk about what work means, what body means and stuff like that. And if you see in the book also, we're always talking about almost everything even in terms. We're talking about it in so many senses, like that there's work at home, there's work at a factory. The definition of labor is far more than going to work in that sense. And that is something I think the girls understood over Madhu's research. This I want to put it that way because I specifically remember this particular conversation when we were in the Kanchipuram room, and Madhu was trying so hard to explain that Nokia is actually a Finland factory, and that there is something that that is a global thing that is affecting something that is very local. And this is when the factory was closing, and it took a lot of them a very leap of knowledge to understand that it's nobody's fault. But it took us many conversations for us to explain that Finland is connected to Kanchipuram, right? In terms of geography of how that was happening, and then this Hanoi coming as the next factory, and Nokia is going there, and then of course over the last 6 years, I think all of us, the mobile girls in total, including Madhu, have followed what has happened with Nokia otherwise. So this is what it has taken. It's been a learning curve for including me and the mobile girls. So for me, I've always seen as of course, we don't come from the same social situation because of the age. We've all been like one group. And when we were talking about this theatre, it was all about taking it to, including my family, taking it to all the.
We lost Sam again. Any other questions or comments or?
Sentence I said, hello?
Yes, okay.
Yeah, the last sentence I said was that this is what work means to us and what does it mean to you. So that was the conversation to take forward from the mobile girls evening.
This conversation has been so great, and we're sort of running out of time. We have 2 minutes. I just want to, if people can sort of, I want to read something very briefly from the book, and it's kind of starts before the final chapter. How can we take this to other people? And beautifully illustrated by Madhushree. It says, our voices matter. What we have shared, our experiences, our stories, our thoughts, it all matters. Our bodies matter, our labor matters, our knowledge matters, we matter. And there's more text, but I just, for lack of time, I'm just going to move on ahead. So it says, we believe our voices will create possibilities to change the way society views us, not just as factory workers, rural migrants, or as disposable bodies, but reflective, thinking young women with feelings, desires, and aspirations. Our journeys of struggles and celebrations will continue, and we will come back again to share our stories in our voices. So with that, I just want, maybe Madhushree, if you have anything to sort of, maybe kind of ending note, and then Sam, for bringing us this, but, just any last thoughts that you want to share with the group?
I just wanted to say that as we were speaking, I got a text from Vigita, our friend from Chennai, saying that so Maithili Sivaraman, who was a trade unionist and whom all of us really deeply admired, whose work and who passed away. So her anniversary, 10th anniversary is coming, and Maithili's daughter and others, they're planning to bring in Mobile Girl to that space for that anniversary, and have a conversation and bringing in Maithili's, what Maithili has left for all of us, and bringing other working class women and the Mobile Girl. So this is such a gift in that sense to as Koni and Anitha were saying. So where do we go from here? How do we land? So there are different ways, and we can have so much more conversation. But I just wanted to say that this just sort of like, I said, oh wow, that is beautiful. That is really amazing.
Madhushree, any last thoughts?
No, just thanks, Sirisha. Thanks, everyone, because this has been such a fulfilling process for all of us. And, this really means a lot that you organized this. And thanks to Koni and Anita.
Well, thank you, everyone, for attending this event. Thank you, Madhu, Sam, and Madhushree for the book, the podcast, for the play, and all of the other ways in which, I think of this not just as us listening, but also as collectively kind of really thinking about what needs to happen in order to change the world. And, Koni and Anitha, you have been doing this as well in other spaces. So thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts, and for being part of this conversation. And I hope we can continue the conversation beyond, because that's what you said, right? Like, how do we, how do I know, by the way, I've ordered your book, but how do I know about these struggles in South Africa had you not written about them, right? Or you and others. So part of that is translating this work, and maybe also shaping the ways in which we understand, and maybe kind of break down these barriers between activist and academic work, because the research is important, the activism is important. And I speak for many here in that, that is what we're interested, right, is in social transformation. So thanks, everyone. We'll continue about Mobile Girls Kootam. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Madhu. You disabled the chat, Sirisha, but I just wanted to say thank you all so much.
Oh, no, I did
Thank
not
you.
disable the chat, Raja.
Thanks, Sirisha. Thanks, everybody. This was really amazing.
Everybody,
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for including us, engaging, listening. I hope all of you write to us, and this is something that takes us forward into something. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
Congratulations.
So great. Thank you so much.